when those needs aren't met, we experience angst. And that's that, it's not the acute, fight, flight, or freeze kind of sensation. It's this underlying angst of, am I safe? Can I grow? Do I matter? Right?
There's one thing that sits at the center of nearly every organizational transformation: how people respond to uncertainty. When organizations face disruption, whether it's AI, restructuring, or something else entirely, leaders often focus on strategy and execution. But beneath every transformation are deeply human dynamics that ultimately shape what happens next. Welcome to the Science for Work podcast, where we explore evidence-based insights from IO psychology and HR management to help make work better. I'm your host, Matt Lampe. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Shonna Waters, organizational psychologist, CEO and co-founder of Fractional Insights, and a leader in applied research on the future of work. In this conversation, we unpack the human dynamics underneath change at work. We explore why uncertainty creates angst, why leaders and employees often experience the same disruption very differently, and what psychology tells us about communication, trust, and performance during transition. If you're navigating change in your organization and want to approach it through an evidence-based, human-centered lens, this episode will sharpen how you think and lead through uncertainty. For more from Shonna beyond this episode, check out the show notes for links to her LinkedIn and Substack. You'll also find additional articles and resources at ScienceForWork.com. For now, let's jump into the conversation with Dr. Shonna Waters. Shonna Waters, welcome to the Science for Work podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much, Matt. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I am excited to dive into a conversation with you about the human experience of change at work, how people respond to uncertainty, how leaders interpret those responses. The conversation really is about the human dynamics that are underneath a lot of the change that goes on. But before we get into any of that, for any of the listeners who may not be familiar with you yet, or who may be new to your work, can you share a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Absolutely, I'm happy to. So again, I'm Shonna Waters. I have an academic background as an organizational psychologist, so came up through very traditional IO roots. I got my bachelor's at University of Maryland, which in and of itself has a deep IO tradition. So I got to study with people like Ben Schneider and Paul Hanges. And then I went to get my PhD in IO from the University of Minnesota, where I worked with Paul Sackett. And then, spent the first half of my career in very traditional IO firms like Humro and PDRI as an external consultant before I went internal at the NSA, where I was there for 5 years leading some of the HR transformation work, and then led research at SHRM for a bit before going into the tech sector, and was one of the founding scientists at BetterUp before starting my own firm. So I now am the CEO and co-founder of a company called Fractional Insights. We're a research-backed advisory and consulting firm really focused on the future of work. I also in my spare time have my own company that is primarily for my thought leadership, coaching, things like that. And I live in the Washington, D.C. area, have 3 beautiful daughters ranging from 6 as of today to 16. So I've got a nice little 10-year span there. And I'm very much riding all of the developmental planes through that journey as well.
Awesome. I love that. So when we're talking about how people respond to uncertainty and to change, when organizations are going through a major change or a significant change, whether it's planned or unplanned, expected or voluntold, in your experience and in your perspective, what aspects of the human component of that tend to get overlooked or misread most often?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's the simplest, most foundational things that are easy to miss. And what I mean by that is, I think we have so many tips and playbooks and models and rules and all of these things for how to help people through change, how to manage people, just generally speaking, all of that. And what I like to say on this is like humans are really complex creatures where, predicting behaviors is hard. And at the same time, it's also really simple, like at Fractional Insights, one of the things we've done is we have studied the universal needs. So any theory of motivation that you look at, there's like some kind of fairly simple, fairly finite set of needs that humans have, the best known being like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We reduce it down to three universal needs. And why is it three? Well, because three is easier to remember than five or six, but it's security, growth, and significance. So in our research, we looked at like, so great, we all have these needs, but how often is it that we are like looking to work specifically to meet those needs? Well, 97% of people look to work to meet those needs. And yet 44% of the time, people are not getting those needs met at work. So you think about then what happens during change and uncertainty, and how does change and uncertainty impact people's sense of security, growth, and significance? Well, all of that ends up being uncertain as people are trying to reorient towards like, what does this change mean for me? Where am I in this change? What does it mean for who I am, the value I bring, my security in the job and role and all of those things? And so like, that's one of those cases where I think like we're so caught up in, the messaging and the mechanics and the from and the to and the metrics and the da 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 da, that sometimes I think like what is most obvious and right in front of us and universal to every person experiencing this change, including the people leading it, by the way, I think is often what gets most missed and is probably like the simplest, highest leverage point to help everyone navigate through it well.
In some of your writings and some of the publications, you've talked about this sense of angst people feel during periods of change, and that sort of sounds like what you may be alluding to with what you're talking about there. From a psychological perspective, what is that angst? Is that angst usually signaling something? What does that angst look like as a signal, or how does it show up?
Yeah, for sure. So yes, so we've got like, imagine this case where, each one of us is walking around with these three dominant primary needs. We're looking to work to meet those needs. When those needs aren't met, we experience angst. And that's that like, it's not the acute like fight, flight, or freeze kind of sensation. It's this underlying angst of, am I safe? Can I grow? Do I matter? Right? And that creates a drag on the organization because it's this these are like these most foundational, biologically driven, evolutionarily reinforced needs to support our own survival and flourishing. And so if you're telling me you want me to do X, we can use AI since that's the one that I think is the universal that everyone's experiencing right now. You want me to use AI. Like that is important for you to achieve your business goals. And by doing so, introducing that into my world triggers all three of my needs. It creates an angst of insecurity, right? Like, well, am I just helping you replace me faster in this job by complying and playing on along my growth. Like, well, now this pathway I thought I was going to have towards, becoming a better programmer or advancing in a consulting firm, like now AI is taking those stepping stones away, right? And ultimately significance, if AI can do the analysis that used to take me weeks to do in minutes, like what is even my value? Like, does my humanity even matter in this company? And so if I'm thinking about those things and trying to figure out how I can retain my job, stay in good standing with you, all of those things while still protecting myself and my future, you now have misaligned incentives. And
Absolutely.
so, that's where we find like the not paying attention to these like really core foundational needs. It's not just about being nice, it's actually about like how do we help companies also achieve their goals in a way that's congruent with rather than opposition to the goals of your individuals, because you need them to bring about this change, even if we're just going to say it's like for the messy middle or whatever until it's just us and the bots and sitting on a beach. So like I think that is some of where this idea of like if we start to look at our change initiatives, at the policies we create, at the companies we're building through this lens of like to what extent is this working with versus against human nature and human needs. Like that's where we talk about this concept of psychological ergonomics. Like we can design the environment in a way that it actually reduces the friction that is not helping our people and not helping our organizational objectives either.
I like that phrase, psychological ergonomics. And I mean, when I just think about ergonomics, I think about just do I have the right chair? Do I have the right desk to physically help? But when you add that other component that you're talking about here, it's, yeah, we can have the physical environment, but there's so much more that's underneath that: identity, competence, relevance that come up that, well, I shouldn't say they come up. They're just a part of that equation. They're part of that system.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they tend to be the unseen undercurrents. Like
Mm.
even if you think about in like your typical employee listening programs or whatever, it's not like we don't know this stuff. We're tapping into all sorts of like motivational um, indicators in our surveys and tools and things like that. I think the reason why I keep advocating for this like really simplistic view of things is I think it's like we're in this complex environment where like think about our listening programs, like how many questions, how many variables or whatever are we attacking in this? And we think about like our benefits programs and we've got benefits for this and that, and it's like it's this proliferation of stuff. And in this world where everything is so complex and people are so overwhelmed and we've got such finite time and cognitive capacity while we're being asked to learn all these things while still performing and whatever, I think we need to simplify and really go back to basics and first principles. And if you ask why 5 times on virtually anything you're doing around people, I think it ends up taking us back down to like, I mean, it all eventually goes down to security, right? Because even things like growth and significance at their most fundamental part, it's like, well, why? It's like, well, because I don't want to be excluded from the group. you know, like I want to keep a roof over my head. I want to feel safe.
Yeah. You mentioned just now, you mentioned capacity, and I think that's another one of those factors. I mean, it's very much in what we're talking about here. All of these different components, whether thinking, for example, if there's a planned significant change, an initiative or a project that has a lot of transition or transformation, something that is going to significantly, we know it's going to significantly disrupt people's work process, even if the outcome is something better. And yet, through that, people's capacity for change can get overloaded when there's the known components that are involved, and then everything else that you're talking about there that can I don't know if threat is the right word, be a threat to those safety factors, but all those other factors that get taken into consideration stress that capacity for change.
Yeah. Yeah, they stress the capacity for change, and the worst part of change is the anticipation of change.
Mm.
It's that uncertainty and the like, I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, we see this in the like in the markets. We see it in our personal lives. I think this tendency to um, awfulize, like in the absence of information, we imagine the worst. And again, that's
Hmm.
like a evolutionary gift for us to like prepare for the worst case scenario, prepare for the lion, that's going to come get us. Um, but I think where that runs up against, and this is where I think it's so important to think not just about the recipients of change and their universal need triad, but also the leaders, right? Because the leaders are trying to preserve all these things themselves, and they're trying to balance, like, what does the organization need, what do people need, what do they personally need. And what happens is they go into their own version of fight, flight, or freeze in the midst of change. And so you think about change communication, and again, AI is very prevalent for this right now, because and I spend a lot of time with C-level leaders where they feel so stuck, because what employees want to hear, what they're imagining the employees want to hear is like, your job is safe. Your job is safe. We need you to adopt AI, but it's going to be better for you. Your quality of life is going to be better. Your day is going to be better, and your job's still going to exist. And they know they can't say that. They don't even know what is going to happen in the future. None of us do, because this technology is advancing so quickly. We're still learning about like what it can do and what it can't do. And it's going to be different tomorrow, maybe even by this afternoon. And so instead of coming out and saying like, we don't know, but here's how we're going to know, and here's how we're going to decide, they're not saying anything. They're waiting for certainty. They're waiting for clarity, because they don't want to lie to their employees. And they also don't want to be perceived as not credible. And so they're just freezing up. And so what's happening in the meantime is people are making up the story.
Mm.
Um, and while some people are, like, just generally speaking, AI optimists and things like that, a lot of people aren't. And no matter what's happening in like your particular organization, we're in a ecosystem where we've got, for a lot of different reasons, very visible, influential people in the world coming out and saying like the mission is actually to replace all employees with technology and things like that. And they're seeing, sequential layoffs, and they're seeing, and so it's kind of like this gap of information is worse than a bad outcome for them. And so we're in that messiness of change. And I think that's whether it's AI or just like that, you're doing an organizational restructuring, but you're not talking about it yet because it's going to happen on February 1st. Like, people know, people sense these things, and that waiting is like the worst part.
I'm so glad we're going in this direction, because you had mentioned something earlier about what I was hearing was how leaders and employees often can experience change so differently, and that's exactly what you're talking about here. And some of taking that one step further, when leaders or managers hesitate to communicate during change for whatever reason, whether they don't have the answers or they're not wanting to, whatever the reason might be, and this isn't to point blame or to pass any judgment, just recognizing their experience. Like you said, they're almost sort of in that sandwich of, I have pressures from this end saying push this way, and I have feedback from that end saying, and so they're navigating this very delicate wire. And I'm curious, when we talk about communication, what does psychology tell us happens when communication gets delayed? I mean, you sort of alluded to that a little bit, but what happens when communications get delayed, and what does effective communication look like when leaders genuinely don't have the answer or don't have certainty?
Yeah, I think again, I like simple frameworks. and particularly when they're evidence-based. So something that I find myself going back to on a daily basis right now is trust. Because again, like trust is so tied to this sense of safety. You know, we talk a lot about psychological safety, but psychological safety, physical safety, all of it, all of this need for security is so trust-based, particularly as a social species. And so how do we trust? What determines trust? Well, it's three things. So, you know, I like three-part frameworks. It's credibility, integrity, and benevolence. So credibility is really like, not just do you know what you're talking about, but it's like, do you understand like my world and can you help me? So that's the credibility component. The integrity component, I think of this as the say-do gap. Are you predictable? Can I predict what your behavior is going to be based on the indicators I'm getting and you know what you're saying you're going to do? Is there consistency there? And then the third is benevolence. Like, do you actually care about what's best for me? Not just the organization or yourself, right? So people are navigating all that all the time. Now, I think where people get hung up is they feel like that means they have to be an expert in whatever the thing is, or they have to know all the answers. And that's not actually the case. Those other two parts, the say-do gap and the do you actually care about me as a person, are even more important. Because if I know you don't know, but I know that whatever way this turns out, you're going to be thinking about me as a human and like, am I going to turn out okay in this? I can let down my guard much more than you being an absolute expert who actually doesn't care anything about me, right? Like, who would you trust in these scenarios? And so that's one of the places where I think, you know, this old model of leadership where there was this huge information asymmetry, we've seen that breaking down for a long time with just like the accessibility of information and, you know, kind of the speed of things happening and those closest to the customer actually having like better intelligence a lot of the time, or at least different intelligence. But I think in this era of, you know, AI and everything, that's just even more true, and no one can know. No one can know everything. We are in a complex, adaptive environment, and like we've got to let go that need to know. And I think what becomes more important is again like anchoring back on trust. And how are we going to find out? Not verifying that we already know. There's one other thing that I want to bring up here, because I think, you know, back to this having empathy also for the people trying to lead through this complex time, is there's something that I refer to as altitude sickness. And, you know, this is again, like we've seen this in the organizational sciences for a long time, these sort of gaps in perception based on level of power and access in an organization. You know, sort of the experience of work for the C-suite is different.
Yeah. Distance from day-to-day work and how people are interpreting or seeing or hearing different things.
Absolutely. And that is understandable given the way that, you know, power and access work, is that you know, if I'm spending my day in a meeting with the ELT, I'm having a very different set of experiences, including that like the only things that get to my desk are really good or really bad. They're either the problems no one else could solve, or they're the things
problems nobody else wants to solve.
Right. Or they're the good news that like, again, like other people are aware of power and trying to access the power themselves. And so they like to bring good news, right? So you get this very non-representative sense of what's happening in the organization around you. And you're spending more and more of your time with just people like you. So there's this like very pragmatic, instrumental like reason why that happens, where we end up with this like big perception gap without conscious intervention. But in addition, there's neuroscience research that actually shows that power impacts our brain in ways that actually dull our ability to take the perspective of others. So like our mirror neurons and our ability to be empathetic to others is depressed by power. So you combine those two things, and now you've got this situation where I have to make decisions that are going to impact all of these people in my stewardship who I have less and less opportunity to observe their experience firsthand. And even through storytelling, it's harder for me to understand it, right? To take that perspective that I haven't experienced. And that makes it tough. So like one place where we're seeing this is this idea of, we call it the horizon versus the cliff as it relates to AI, again, back with this idea of altitude sickness, where if you ask executives, will AI make the experience of work better or worse? They are super optimistic. Like they think they're seeing like all the positive benefits, the efficiency, the productivity, all this stuff. You ask managers, like people in the middle of the organization, and they're mildly optimistic. You ask individual contributors, and we see like a slight effect on, they think AI is going to make the daily experience of work worse. And why is that? Well, the executives are looking out at the horizon. Their job is to look into the future. The individual contributor's job is to get through what's in front of them today, right? And they've already got like a massive stack of work, and now you want them to learn something new, taking that first productivity dip, and the expectations are going to increase on the other side. And so now we have this case where it's this high stakes situation where the executives have commitments to their shareholders around the financial impact of this technology, and your people who actually have to implement it are not seeing that positive, better future,
Yeah. To me, it's almost, it sounds like, and I've seen this in different circumstances, there's a difference in perception of ROI. The high level that's looking at the horizon, yeah, they have their shareholders that they have to report to, but they've also, in order to implement a technology, for example, we'll go with the AI example, in order to implement something like that, there's a high upfront cost. Well, we need to have a return on investment. It costs us this much to implement it, or to purchase the licensing for it. We need to make sure that investment, we have a return. Whereas the individual user, their return on investment is, like you said, it's whether it is or is not, there's a perception that it impacts their capacity. So their return on investment is not, this will help me do my job better. It's great, I have to learn one more thing. And there's this, again, no judgment or blame, just observation. What you're talking about here, there's this, to me, it's once you become aware that there's a distorted or a difference in perception, how do you address that? How do you move forward from that?
Right. Yes, this is one of the things that we spend a lot of time trying to help organizations with, which is, first of all, it's not one perception. Like obviously some individual contributors are like very excited about this, and they're
give me that tool yesterday.
Exactly. They are the ones experimenting, pushing the organization in it, and others are not. What we're seeing with AI in particular is that, if you typically look at any technology adoption curve, there's like there's the people who are leading the charge, there's the laggards, but there's all these people in the middle. What we're seeing with AI is actually it's polarizing. So we don't have as many people in that middle group as we typically do. And frankly, we also have fewer in the laggard kind of category. But so I think that's one of the reasons why it feels so tense. You don't have that like buffer group that's like, yeah, I see the good things, I see the bad things as strongly as you have with other technologies. And even for some of the people who are the fastest adopters, it's coming not just from this positive view of it. So like in our research, people who believe that AI is the key to getting ahead, so this ambition related motivation around AI, they're adopting faster, but those same people actually have high fear associated with it. So part of the
Mm.
motivation is coming from their concern about their role being eliminated and worried that their skills are going to become obsolete. So it's this cocktail of, sort of like positive and negative emotions that's driving this adoption. And so, like, I think part of the answer here and like, how do we acknowledge the altitude sickness, cure it, and move forward? Well, it starts with really trying to understand, say if I have a team of 7 people, I need to know like who among them are like really gung ho and who aren't, and how do I meet them where they are and move forward, pair them in ways where they can support each other. Because, for the people who are more hesitant, these people who are the gung ho adopters, like that can look reckless.
Sure.
It can actually make them dig in more because they're like, oh, I have to protect us, like help us be the brakes. Um, and so I think being able to we can't change what we can't see. So it starts with being able to see it in our own teams and see the altitude sickness overall, to say like, I as a leader have blind spots on this. Like knowing that this isn't just like me being a bad person, like there's neurological things going on that are like impeding my ability to understand the lived experience of the people in my stewardship. I need to proactively put some supports in place. We call this structural empathy, to make sure that I can see what I can't see. So that might be, again, some of these cross-functional working groups or committees where we're very intentionally bringing in people from different parts of the organization, reverse mentoring. It might be like I used to talk about, do you remember the show Undercover Boss?
Yep. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and I'm probably dating myself with this, but Matt, it seems like I'm dating you too. Um, uh, but this idea of like, yeah, like get in to understand like what are the blockers? Like what are the
Hmm.
things that are slowing people's adoption down? Like what is their lived experience? Because then as someone who has this other perspective, like you can help resolve it. You can speak their language and speak to their needs and their angst and their concerns, but without taking those steps, yeah, we're just like talking past each other.
Yeah. What you're talking about there, what comes to mind is, so I love a good survey. They're great. And this notion that people don't like taking surveys, I think that I'm not sure that I totally agree with that. I think that it's people don't like to take surveys that don't have resolve to it. So if you ask me what my input is on this, but then that never gets acted on, that feedback loop doesn't get closed, yeah, there's that survey fatigue that can start to set in. But that's not a fatigue against the survey. It's a fatigue against I'm not being heard. But even with those surveys, you ask everybody, what's the best way that you want us to provide you the updates on how we as a company move through bringing AI. Let's keep running with that example. And majority says, just send us an email. But on paper, that's what sounds like the top communication. But it's in that ability, what you're talking about there, go into the everyday experience. And all of a sudden you find out, yeah, they get the email, they gloss over it and move on. What really lands well to keep them educated and informed is maybe it's hosting, like an office hours or different workshops where there's a Q&A time. That never came up on the survey. And you wouldn't have found that out had you not gone in and been a part of that lived experience, not just the written experience. Curious to
Yeah.
get any kind of thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, one of the things that comes up for me in that example is just like what are we actually trying to learn? What is the best method to learn it? And like how the data sources, like I guess the validity of the data sources, like so for example, like if you ask me a question like how do you want to be how do you want this information conveyed to you, and it's like so hypothetical, right? Like I don't know, like
Pick
what's
C, A, B, C, D. I'm going to pick C.
right, and what's the thing that sounds like the least work to me?
Yeah.
um and it's also going to be contextually determined, right? Because if I have high levels of trust and high relational equity with like my leaders, like maybe I'm like I'd welcome engaging with them in a live conversation or
Right.
something
Yeah.
because I would feel comfortable asking a question or whatever. If I don't trust them or I don't know them, why do I want to?
Yeah. Exactly. It comes back to trust, and I love that everything kind of comes back to that safety and that trust component.
I think all this goes back to this question of like, what am I trying to achieve? Like, why am I even asking the question of like, how do you want this information communicated? Well, I would imagine it's because I am trying to figure out what is going to be the most effective way to get my message out. And I want people to feel like they have co-created or had some kind of agency in that process, like sort of the procedural justice component of organizational justice. Under what conditions can I learn that? And this is a case where you're probably better off not trying to get everybody's input in this and saying like, actually, let me go deep with a smaller number of employees, but like really sitting with them and doing the like more anthropological research, the qualitative, like let's talk through it. Let's get more specific, because then you can think about like, well, how like would I want to know that, and what does it depend on, and and then we're in dialogue about it. But I think these questions of like, when does a one directional conversation make sense, which like most surveys are pretty one directional.
Sure. Yep.
Versus like, where do we actually need to be like co-creative in getting the answers we need?
So I want to shift gears a little bit because this was something that popped into my mind earlier, and it's still sort of ruminating a little bit. When performance dips, you have again, whether it's planned or unplanned, large changes going on, and you have all of this. There's a focus on the communication. There's a focus on the perception, altitude sickness, the cliff, all of these different things. And oftentimes what I've seen is there can be a performance dip that's often accompanying that learning and that change. I'm curious, how can organizations keep that focus on performance? We talked a little bit about, you have, whether it's the shareholders or whoever, that you're wanting to still maintain that positive component. And yet at the same time, you have people that are building new capabilities that aren't, it's not a 30-minute training session. It's something that is fundamentally, structurally significant to their day-to-day operations. And so how can organizations think about performance while still building some of those new capabilities within their people?
Such a good question. And this feels very important right now. And I think so. We're talking about the J curve here, which is that efficiency dip that we inevitably get through when we're learning something, implementing something new. It happens because upskilling and training take time. There's process reengineering that has to happen even if we're just, I'm going to start using a mug instead of something, right? Like you've got to change the things around that to actually enable that. And it requires experimentation and iteration. Like typically, it's not nailed in the first time. And so this is a problem in a number of ways. So on the employee or implementer side, that makes change less appealing, right? Because especially in the context we're in, where it's like, well, and I was consulting with an organization last month where this came, where we were talking about how we were going to go in with their leaders and talk about the J curve, and there's education about the J curve to set expectations for, when you see that dip, that's not failure. It's actually a sign that it's working.
Yep.
That is learning in action, and it goes down before it curves back up at more of an exponential, slope. And so it is worth it to experience that short-term dip to be able to get the upside on the back end. But if you don't know that, whether you're the leader who is accountable for the ROI, or you're the employee who's scared because now I'm in this context where it feels like people are just looking for reasons to lay someone off, I'm taking personal risk to stop doing the thing that I had proficiency on and that was good at and have been rewarded for in the past, to take the leap of faith to say okay, I'm going to trust you. This thing is going to help me. And in the meantime, if I don't have confidence that my leaders know that that dip is temporary and they're going to have my back during that period versus be like, you've missed your marks, they're not going to do it. It's never a good time. And so this is where I find that, this notion of expectation setting and being able to say yeah, we are going to see returns, but here's the time horizon. Here's what we think is going to happen. Because back to trust is your shareholders too, they are going to be willing to trust you on a dip if you tell them that dip is coming, because now you've increased your credibility. Now, oh, you said this was going to happen, right? And you can, and they'll keep coming along the journey with you. So I think it's really important to, again, have the language around it, reinforce it. Your leaders have to know it exists, and your employees have to know that your leaders know it exists, and that there's tolerance for that. But where is that not possible? Because when I work with organizations, like I was saying last month, when I'm telling them I'm going to do this and we're going to talk about this, then all of a sudden people get uncomfortable and they say well, we can't actually have that in these parts of the business because these are mission critical. These are non-negotiable. Okay, then we need to name that. And we need to design for that, because if we're all pretending that the J curve is, something that we can absorb, but in truth it's not, that's where you're going to break trust and nobody's going to follow you again.
Taking a step back, looking at angst and communication, perception gaps, performance dips, all these different things, there's a common thread through all of that, which I think goes back to sort of the main essence of the conversation here, the human dynamics, the human side of change. That phrase, can be, that phrase is thrown out a lot, the human side of this, the human side of that, but really doing the work to ask the questions that you're talking about, that you bring up with conversations with the leadership teams and with different organizations and in the research, to really understand what does that look like. And it's not just the ask and observe, but it's that follow through of, and now how do we move forward with this? I don't know. I'm curious to get any kind of thoughts on that. I don't know if I captured that well.
Yeah. I mean, what comes up for me is again, these fundamental first principles on, I'm probably a broken record on organizations are not technical systems. They are social systems. Organizations exist to align disparate energy and actors towards a shared goal with shared resources. And that is a fundamentally social process, right? And so like the real way that work gets done in organization is shared mental models and knowledge transfer and relational dynamics. And this is why it's like the currency for all of this is these things that feel really squishy, like trust and psychological safety and like, and I think like especially right now there's this desire to um, it's, I even had a leader say to me, in recent months, like people in culture, it's just a lot of drama. Like I like the bots because it takes out the drama, right? So there's this desire to just like that stuff feels frictionful. Like let's
Yeah.
engineer that out and just like go with the simple
Yeah. The
like
soft stuff, the soft components, the soft skills are not soft at all. They're very hard. They're very difficult to navigate.
right, right. And so we're at this time where like we have really, in recent decades, valued more and reinforced more of this technical solution,
Hmm.
um, the technical solution and the technical skills and all of that. And we're suddenly in this world where, like, that's the stuff that we will be able to offload to a greater and greater extent. And I would argue that what is left is the messy stuff, right? That
Yeah.
actually it's not the noise around it. It is the thing. Like that is
Hmm.
actually what an organization is that connective tissue. It's the norms, it's the models, it's the. And so I think, you know, my hope in all of this is that this time period is actually giving us an opportunity to like sort of shine the light on like just because we couldn't measure it as like cleanly or obviously in the past doesn't mean that it wasn't important. And I think like we're going to be able to see that more and more, both because our measurement is advancing in it, but also because um, we're finding now. I mean, McKinsey is saying that for every dollar you spend on, the data and technology and an AI transformation, you should be spending
Hmm.
$5 on the people stuff. So there's growing
Yeah.
recognition that like all of this only works if we get the
Yeah.
rest of it right.
I hadn't heard that McKinsey number, but when you say that, I light up. I get excited because it's like a giant megaphone shouting out, "Yes, this is what IO psychology does. This is what HR management can do. This is vital to any organization."
Absolutely.
Okay, so for for the individual contributor or for the leader that's listening, what's a small shift that they could make right now that could meaningfully improve how they are experiencing uncertainty at work, or maybe how their organization and the people that they lead experience uncertainty?
Yeah. I mean, so this is something I'm advocating a lot in organizations right now is kind of increasing focus on identity because the behaviors we engage in actually stem from who we think we are as people. So I have a colleague, Dave Dorsey. He and I have been working on this recursive model of performance, which is really just like it all starts with identity. We behave, our behaviors get feedback from the environment that tell us are they good or bad, and that then gets reincorporated into our self identity, right? So it's this recursive loop. And again, AI, like one of the reasons why it's different than other technological advancements in the past is because it actually is really causing all of us to, I think, question our identities at a pretty fundamental level. And I'll focus a little bit on like what is the value I bring to an organization. But again, I think a lot of it is like what is like is being human even valuable? Can the bot be a better human than a human can? Like I hear a lot of these conversations now.
Sure. Yeah.
So I mean, these are pretty existential
Hmm.
identity threats. Um, and so how do we create more kind of change resilience? Well, some of that is about creating more resilient identities.
Hmm.
And so, the psychological literature on this is like people who actually have multiple identities fare
Hmm.
better than those with like one rigid identity. So within a certain job, you can anchor that away from like the process or the task. So I, as a leader, like my value comes in communicating or making decisions or something like that, to like actually my value comes into aligning, you know, these disparate sources of energy to a common purpose, right? Like how do we get that bigger? It's less about process, it's more about impact. And if we can do that for ourselves as leaders, then we can help our employees do that. And I think that can start within your job, but then it should really broaden out to your world, right? Like if all of this did go away tomorrow, and I personally think humans are wired to work, and we're always going to find ways to create value for ourselves or
Hmm.
others. But say work went away, what then? Like
Yeah.
what are these other sources of impact or value or purpose in your life? Because at the point where we have that, it becomes less precious, which gives us permission to experiment and
Hmm.
take risks.
Ooh. Ooh, I love that. That's awesome. Shonna, this has been a wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. Thank you for sharing all of your insights and your knowledge and your experience. Where can people learn more about you, about Fractional Insights, and the things that you do that can make work better?
Well, I would probably direct you first to LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. So Shonna Waters on LinkedIn, and I try to post, at least 3 times a week, all sorts of musings. And then I also recently got onto Substack, and so you can hear from me there. But also, I like to co-author and collaborate with a lot of my friends in the space on these topics too. So definitely subscribe on Substack.
Awesome. We will make sure to include links to both LinkedIn and Substack. And yes, I would highly encourage people to follow the work that you do and the insights that you share. They are incredibly valuable and really make a difference. So thank you. Thank you
Thanks
for
so much.
sharing your time, Shonna. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure, truly. And yeah, have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Science for Work podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it or leaving a review. It might just be the opportunity that helps someone else discover evidence-based insights they can use in their work. For more research-backed resources, articles, and tools, or to get involved with the Science for Work community, visit us at ScienceForWork.com. A special thanks to our guest and to the entire Science for Work team. Science for Work is an independent, nonprofit foundation of evidence-based practitioners who want to make work better.